All right. So I thought that I guess before I'd start, I'd go into a little bit of history about um, this document and what's going on here. Um, about like 2.5 years ago, I made this thing as a little cheat sheet to help myself remember certain patterns, specifically these kind of like more complex patterns, like so render props and higher order components, etc. So I go into them a little bit, but I go into just enough detail so you kind of get the idea, and then you can experiment for yourself. This all started from a document that I created for Office for my workplace, which had kind of the same idea, but it was a little bit more opinionated about very like specific things, like how to order props, computed values, all those kind of things. And what I learned from that experience is that it was really helpful early on, really helpful. So people could kind of come to this document, find something that they were looking for, and then be able to implement it with confidence that they were kind of like on the right track. Unfortunately, what happened was it became less useful over time as we started to learn more, and some of those things changed. So, for example, this document was originally written in CoffeeScript, and there was kind of like a big hubbub when we changed it to when I changed it to ES6. There was also some ideas that we had early on with the idea of let's see. I don't see it in this list, but oh yeah, sub render. So there was kind of this idea early on that you could write these sub render functions. And the nice thing about it is that it would isolate them inside of the class. But this was kind of like a pre-modules concept. So once we had modules, it was a lot easier to modularize components and isolate them by module instead of isolating them by the class. So a lot of that advice kind of went away. Anyway, so instead of kind of putting everyone through the pain of updating this again, I kind of just let it die and created my own. And this is the markdown file that gets rendered out into this, reactpatterns.com. So let's see. So where we're at today is that this document is more or less like, like 2.5 years old. It's got like a bunch of issues on here that I've never looked at because I'm a terrible maintainer of these types of things. And there are things that are just kind of out of date. So this context API has changed. We no longer have prop types by default. I mean, and that's just in like the first paragraph of this thing. So I thought I'd take some time. I have a little bit of time this morning, so I thought I would kind of start on updating this. I know there's a lot to do. So yeah, I'm going to do that. I'll set a timer for like every few minutes, and I'll kind of check the chat if there's any questions or whatnot. I've never done one of these before, so have grace on me. Cool. So let's dive in. So we got I'm using VS Code. We have the markdown file here, and then kind of the rendering of that over on the right. So first off, these used to be called stateless functions, or they used to be referred to as stateless functions, and now they're referred to as functional components. So I'm going to update that. If my editor will work. So okay, so I guess another thing too, looking at this, one thing I've kind of changed I guess, in the last couple years is that I really prefer to use this function syntax. One, I guess the biggest reason is because it's a lot easier to refactor when you have the return in here. So if someday this does become a like class component, I don't have to like do a whole, it like saves me a step. That's just personal preference. It really doesn't matter if you go this route or this route. There are some things kind of coming down the pipe that lead me to believe that this might be a better default. I don't know. I see it a lot more, which kind of leads me to think that you're going to start seeing this in documentation more than the other options. So anyway, let's take that. Turn greeting. Cool. Perfect. Okay, so we have function components or functional components. I've always hated that name, by the way. I'd much prefer component functions and component classes because we don't call them classical components. Little nit there. Let's see. I'm not going to worry too much. Oops, I deleted a line here. I'm not going to worry too much about the text in these. So I'll come back and do that later. One second. So yeah, come back and do the text later. Get props in context, except for this. I'm just gonna take that out. We use context totally different now. I don't want to keep contributing to the old way. Let's copy that. There are props there. Okay, so what's this example doing? Okay, so we're not showing that context anymore, so I'm going to take that out. And this looks great. Props name. Cool. So we're going from greeting, which is static, to greeting, which takes a prop of name. Perfect. Looks good. They can define local variables where a function block is used. I just don't even think that's useful anymore. But you can get the same result by using other functions. As it's related to the other one, no longer useful. I'm going to be real brutal with my previous work here. See, they can have defined default props and prop types and context types. All those are going to go away. This is just going to be default props. Yeah, so this is, I don't usually, oh, man, my editor's having a hard time keeping up with this stream. So I don't often use default props anymore, and this may be an anti-pattern, but usually if I were to, let's say I like to structure name off, I can just kind of assign a default value here. And for these functional style components, that's typically how I do it. However, in the flow of this document, I don't actually get to this concept of destructuring until part 3. So I might save that and just kind of say that you can assign the default props there. Yeah, I feel good about that. Okay, so let's look at what we have. Man. Oh, I see what's happening. DT. Okay, so this is a link. Let me make sure that that link is right. So we'll go to here, reactjs.org. We'll search for functional components and get an updated link. Looks like that's it. This sentence is stupid, but I'll fix it later. Okay, so JSX spread attributes. Spread attributes is a JSX feature. It's syntactic sugar for passing all of an object's properties as JSX attributes. These two examples are equivalent. All right. Use these to forward props to underlying components. Okay. Let's change that actually to, let's see. So you can watch this refactor happen like 100 times. Oops. I really need to set up a keyboard. Some type of macro for that would be awesome. Let me know if you know of one that works with VS Code. Cool. I think that's right. Now can I expect fancy div to add attributes it's concerned with? Now that I'm reading through this is not as clear as I had originally thought that it was 2.5 years ago. So that's interesting, an interesting revelation. I'm just going to go through and just keep kind of touching up the examples though. And then maybe go through the text another time. Okay, that's fine. Just copy this. I think this example is saying that this needs to be after if we want it to be kind of immutable. So no matter what, it's going to apply this class and only class if it's behind this props. If it's before it, then it'll get totally obliterated. And this final example just kind of shows how we can merge those together. So again, I'll copy this previous example and with this style syntax and just kind of change it up. So using object structuring, which I haven't actually introduced, so I guess I should probably add some kind of lead there. Let's see. So we'll have class name. We're pulling that off. Then we're going to have this render function. And then all that does. Oh, wow. Sorry. I think I must have left that in early on when I was showing how to turn that into a class. Stupid. Or just added it because I'm dumb. So yeah, so class name props. So we're structuring all these off. We are then merging kind of our class that we want with the class names that are provided, and just kind of doing a simple join, and then adding the rest of the props on the back. Perfect. That is good-ish enough for now. It's a good starting point. All right, destructuring assignment. Let me see if there's anything in chat real quick. I don't even know how many of you are. There's one. Hi there. Apparently I didn't turn it on. All right. Okay, so let's go into destructuring arguments. Assuming that link is still good. Just nicely with props in functional components. These examples are equivalent. Okay. Curious. I'm tempted not to change this, but I probably should, given that the rest of them are going to be like this. But I think I can still probably leave this on one line. Yeah, that works. Okay, cool. So let's jump into REST parameters. REST parameter syntax allows you to collect all of the remaining properties in an object. So we have our example of that, which I'll copy from this. Oops. Oh no. Oh no. Cool. In turn, this object can use JSX spread to forward props to the composed component. I'm starting to wonder if this section should be above the other section. I'll leave myself a note to go over that again. I think it should, just because it gets kind of complicated without those things. So, yeah. So in this example, we have that, and what we're adding is the props. Perfect. Spreading those props out. The props that are sans name. Avoid forwarding non-DOM props to composed components. Destructuring makes this very easy because you can create a new props object without component-specific props. Okay. I guess that's just reinforcing what I had done before. Conditional rendering. You can't use regular if-else conditions inside a component definition. The conditional ternary operator is your friend. So I say if we have some kind of condition, we'll render this. That's kind of this, what is it, short circuit operation, I guess. Unless, so we do condition or render that, and then if else, we have the ternary. These really haven't changed. Perfect, perfect. Children types. React can render children of any type. This was really more just leading into the next area where we talk about render props. I am going to start changing these to props. At the time, it was kind of going either way. People were referring to them as both render props, render callbacks, children as function. It feels like kind of years later that render props kind of won. So I guess I'll just change that every time I see it. Array as children. Providing an array as children is very common. It's how lists are drawn in React. Okay, map. Looks fine. Just giving a demonstration of what's actually happening. Cool. Function as children. Using a function as children isn't inherently useful. Yes, that's not useful. However, it can be used in component authoring for some serious power. Stupid. This technique is commonly referred to as render props. This is a powerful technique used by libraries like React Motion. I assume that's the same. When applied, rendering logic can be kept in the owner component instead of being delegated. Render props for more details. Okay, cool. So render props. Here's a component that uses a render prop. It's not useful, but it's an easy illustration to start with. Actually, not even sure how to do this. I'm sure that I tested this at the time, but this is really I'm feeling insecure about whether or not this even works. Oh yeah, that would work. Okay, cool. Cool. So with return children, the component calls children as a function with some number of arguments. Here is the number 500. To use this component, we give it a function as children. Okay. So we take the width value and return a component using window is width. Perfect. Yep. Width to make rendering decisions. So if width is greater than 600, it's not going to be because it's 500. If we plan to use this condition a lot, we can define another component to encapsulate the reused logic. Okay, gotcha. So we're taking width. Let's see. So we have a min width component. We're taking width as min width in children. Okay, then when we're taking width from our render prop and then checking if it's greater than the min width. Okay, cool. Doesn't seem like a brilliant example in retrospect. Okay, so that could use some improvement. Let's start leaving myself some notes here. I guess there's not really a comment syntax in Markdown, huh? Make this better. It sucks. So obviously a static width component isn't useful. Okay, so I guess I've tried to make it more useful here, but I'd like to see it less convoluted in this main point. Obviously a static width component isn't useful, but one that watches the browser window is. Here's a sample implementation. Okay, so window width starts at 0. Inner width sets up an observer. I should probably clean up after myself. I'm worried. Typically, I like to keep these examples as short as possible, or as terse as possible. But I'm worried that, like, if someone were to copy and paste this as a standalone thing, this is not good because it doesn't clean up after itself. So component will mount. It just gets really frustrating because now I have to put this inside of a function, which just adds a lot of indirection I don't like. But say Libby. So what should we call this? Handle resize. Okay, so we're gonna do window dot remove. Oops. Event listener resize, and we need to I think that's how it works. I'll run all these examples through a CodePen later after getting them, or CodePen, Code Sandbox later. Okay. Sure, why not? Let's just stick with that. I'll figure out my errors later. Oh, I gotta actually define handle resize. It's gonna be this. Oh yeah, I forgot about all this mess. Oh man, I just don't even know if this is worth it. It's gonna be so... I'm just gonna add a note about, I think maybe I'll add an additional example. Yeah, just because the indirection just gets so insane once you have to do all that. Oh, I wasn't even doing it right anyway. I needed to call set state. Yeah, so I'll add a second example there later. Children pass through. You might create a component designed to apply context and render its children. So I guess this is all about this children.only. This section has always been kind of unclear. I might just remove it. Proxy components. I'm not sure if this name makes any sense. Man, at least I'm being honest. So buttons are everywhere in web apps, and every one of them must have the type attribute set to button. Well, not everyone, but anyone that's not a submit. So writing this attribute handle hundreds of times is error prone. We can write a higher level component to proxy props to lower level button component. Okay. Is that refactor again? We can use button in place of button or capital B button in place of button and ensure that the type attribute is consistently applied everywhere. Okay, great. Perfect. Oh, that's it. Okay. maybe, oops. Let's bring some more conclusion to that. This is useful. Okay, cool. So style components. This is a proxy component. Proxy component applies. Oh, I guess this section does kind of go into that, but maybe more lead into this section would be better. Let's see, style component. This is a proxy component applied to the practice of style. Say we have a button. It uses class to be styled as a primary button. Okay. Button primary. We can generate this output using a couple single purpose components. Okay, so we have a primary button, takes props, spreads those out, and adds this primary key. This is actually not a great practice because you could do things like secondary, what is it? Tertiary? Auxiliary? Anyway, you can do stuff like that, and they can all be, it's like saying all of them are true when not all of them can be true. So that's no bueno. So this example should definitely be updated. So what would that be called? Cool, perfect. Yeah, I don't even know. Style, I guess? No, style's taken. Let's see. Bulma is a popular library. Let's see what they do. Elements. Button. What do they call them? Just colors? Is. I don't know what's called. Let's call them like, I don't know, kind, I guess. And this would be primary. I'm going to say variant, but that's too hard to remember every time. So type primary. Ship it. So function, oops. Type primary, perfect. Okay, so this is gonna change. So that'll be type now. So what am I doing here? So we're returning a button component with type defined. Class name, we are using class names, which we've imported here. We're going to do button, and if primary is set, which this is going to be type. No. Oop. So if type is primary, I think there's a better syntax for that if we're doing that type of thing. But this will be fine for now. Should have said that I was streaming how to refactor component definitions from arrow functions to functions. Let's see. So it can help to visualize this. So primary button, which renders a button primary true. That's no longer the case. Type primary. Oh gosh. Type stupid. Stupid. I mean, I could get away with it, I guess, but I don't like that. Let's go kind. Can let me know if you have something you like better. My brain is just not working for coming up with a better name for that. So kind, primary, button, class name, button primary. Oh, that one was actually right. Type button type. Okay, cool. Using these components, all of these result in the same output. So button primary is going to do the same thing as button. Good gracious, kind primary. Okay, cool. This can be a huge boon to style maintenance. It isolates all concerns of style to a single component. This actually is not something that I believe anymore. Yeah, so I have a video or a talk where I talk about how like a button would eventually have like an enumerable of kind, and then it would be responsible for playing all of these classes. I think that makes sense if you only want to have one button, but I don't like anything where I don't tend to like systems where everything is kind of dependent on this base class. I would much more see like buttons.js as a module and have that export different types of button. So like a scaled button, primary button, etc. Instead of having all of those just be props, kind of defined props on a base class, I much more prefer to compose them in this way. That's kind of beyond what we're going to talk about here, but that's what I'm talking about when I say I don't really believe that this is the best path anymore. So I'll come back to that and flesh kind of the messaging out on that. But this all looks about right where it was before. Event switch. I don't think this is something that anybody ever uses. When writing event handlers, it's common to adopt the handle whatever name. I still think it's good practice, though. I don't know if it's slower or whatever, but I really like it. For components that handle several event types, these function names can be repetitive. The names themselves might not provide much value, so they simply proxy to other action functions. So handle click, handle mouse event, handle mouse leave. Consider writing a single event handler for your component and switching on event type. So you would have a single handle event, a switch, and kind of all this stuff. So on click, mouse enter, mouse leave. Hey. Yeah, come on in. No, that's right. So let's see. Alternatively, for simple components, you can call imported action functions directly from components using arrow functions. This language sucks. Oops. Let me see if I can even understand what I'm trying to do here. Do stuff on click. function some imported action. Well, that should definitely be like, just import that shit. So yeah, definitely come back to that because that is not awesome. Don't fret about performance optimization until you have problems. Seriously, don't. That doesn't feel altogether necessary right there. I mean, I had a question about it, but I don't have any answers. So why bring it up? Layout components. Layout components result in some form of, I'm going to have to leave here in a second for lunch. Some form of static DOM element. It might not need to update frequently, if ever. Consider a component that renders two children side by side. Okay, so we have a left side and a right side component. We can aggressively optimize this component. While horizontal split will be parent to both components, it will never be their owner. You can tell it to update never without interrupting the life cycles of the components inside. This is helpful information, I think. So I'll leave it as is. Yeah. Should component update false? Yeah, that's fine. I think there's going to be better ways to do this in the near future, but I will worry about that then. A container component. A container does data fetching and then renders its corresponding subcomponent. This is like nobody even uses this pattern anymore, but it is, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that. I guess it's a stepping stone concept to the kind of bigger compositional ideas of render props and higher order components. So I guess it's useful for that, for reference. Whoop. Should have left those parens in. Okay, we can create. Okay, so I have some comments. So we can create a new component responsible for fetching data and rendering the stateless comment list. So this is the stateless comment list. This one is the stateful component. It starts with 0 comments and it does this. This should definitely be a fetch. Apparently, I wasn't using fetch 2.5 years ago. Let's see. So where's our URL? Oops, missed the quotes. So how do we do this again? Then res.json. Then let's see, this is going to be JSON this dot set state. I guess I'm assuming that this is at the base level. Yeah. Cool. That feels better. Okay. Perfect. I'm going to write different containers for different application contexts. Okay, so I'd like to lead that better into these, so it's not, people aren't thinking that this is just kind of something that is used regularly. because there is an inherent naming problem. If you kind of follow this to the letter, you would have a bunch of containers where it is nice to abstract the containers themselves into reusable things instead of locking them to a specific implementation. My thoughts, I guess it doesn't really matter. So higher order components, higher order function is a function that takes and or returns a function. It's not more complicated than that. So what's a higher order component? If you're already using container components, these are just generic containers wrapping up a function. Let's start with our stateless greeting. Okay, so we have a greeting. And if there's no name, we say connecting, and then we say hi name. Okay. It seems like we'd handle seems like we could handle this better with default props if we wanted to keep the same concept. But I really don't like when one component kind of at the root level does a condition like this. But let me look at the rest of it and see what we got. If it gets props.name, it's not going to render that data. Wow, it's not gonna. Or it's gonna. It's gonna. Wow, who wrote this? Me 2.5 years ago. Otherwise, it'll say that it's connecting. Now for the higher order bit. Man, all this stuff is so silly. Who writes like that? See, so we have const connect compose component class. So it's returning a component class, name, it's holding a name and state, and this would fetch or connect to a store. New MacBook so freaking often, it's ridiculous. Okay, I'm gonna keep that for now because that just really looks a lot better that way. Okay, this is just a function that returns a component that renders the, actually, honestly, or don't. It's possible to just not mess with state at all, just to demonstrate the concept with a kind of like static value, like I do with the width. While strained, I feel like it kind of eliminates all of this extraneous stuff that doesn't matter and is going to change based on your implementation anyway. It's just a function that returns a component that renders the component we passed as an argument. Last step, we need to wrap our hour. Greeting component in connect. Why the heck am I using connect? Connected my component. Okay, I gotta leave here in like 10 minutes. This is a powerful pattern for providing fetching and providing data to any number. Wow. Rewrite that shit. Stateless function components. Functional components. Functional. Oh my gosh. Components. Okay. State hoisting. Functional components don't hold state as the name implies. Nope, not anymore. Events are changes in state. Their data needs to be passed to stateful container components. Oh my gosh, that's one line. Component parents. Okay. This is called state hoisting. It's accomplished by passing a callback from a container component to a child component. So we have a name container and it handles the change. This is very confusing without showing the implementation. Oh, I guess it. Okay, since I'm talking about state, this should show state. Okay. Cool. Since I don't have time, I'll come back and look for all these kind of arrow function styles and fix those later. Okay, that still works. Name receives an on-change callback from name container and calls on events. The alert above makes for a terse demo, but it's not changing state. It's change. Oh, okay. So I go and I do that. I'm not necessarily loving this pattern where I kind of like show something immediately that's unuseful and then kind of make it useful, just to save like 3 lines. Whatever. So it's hoisted to a container by providing. I think this is still relevant. No for state hoisting. Okay, so controlled inputs. It's hard to talk about controlled inputs in the abstract. Let's start with an uncontrolled normal input and go from there. Input text. When you fiddle with this input in the browser, you see the changes. This is normal. Controlled input disallows the DOM mutations that make this possible to set the value of the, okay. This won't change because we're setting value. Obviously, static inputs are not very useful to users. True, true. So we derive a value from state. Fair enough. Cool. Okay, cool. So that's the end of the document. I gotta change this. Yeah, so that's the end of the document. I'm realizing kind of the the biggest thing that needed to be updated maybe wasn't so much the patterns or the syntax, but really kind of clarifying some of what these things do. However, I think that we did make some updates that made it clearer, made it a little bit more like React 16-ish. There were a couple points that I don't know. It doesn't look like I'm actually using a lot of APIs that have been deprecated in recent years. So I think next time I'm going to go through and actually flesh out the language of this. I may or may not stream that. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you stuck around, hit me up on Twitter at Chantastic if you thought this was at all interesting and want to see the second part of it where I actually do some of the writing and flesh out some of the ideas, flesh out some of the patterns for communicating these ideas. Thanks.